previous talk, we learned how we can support creators in the future. And this is a talk more about how could we create differently in the future or now. So it's about creating text, poems, prose, whatever, articles, in a decentralized peer-to-peer way. And actually, I'll dive into the tech stack in a minute, but I think it's always fun to first see what it does. So I'll give a very short demo. So I have created an example poem. I hope it will be readable, we'll see. So this is I'll give some context. So I started working on DcentReads when I was thinking of publishing some of my poetry, my prose, and I had a bit of an instinctive dislike of the publishing world. And then I figured, how could someone publish in a free manner, so you don't have to go through a publisher, have the contract where they often take some of your rights. And then one option is you create a website and you host it, but this involves certain costs, especially if by some fortunate accident you become popular. It's quite expensive to run a popular website. And that's how I stumbled on the hypercore stack, which I will talk about after the demo, which is the technology underlying all this. Because there it's peer-to-peer, so you don't actually have any server costs. And then I started developing just basic publication of text. And then there was a bit of a back and forth between the creative side and the technological side of me. And let's say I developed a technique which is only possible with a decentralized way of publishing, which is you embed parts of other poems or texts in your own text. So what I often started doing was I entered in a discussion with a poem which was already published, and then maybe try to think, okay, well, this poem is really nice. For example, the poem which I use in this poem, it's by G. Manley Hopkins. But G. Manley Hopkins had a pretty miserable life. And then my question is, what is wrong in your view on life, the things you express in your poetry, which could be corrected? So I basically go looking for the error, entering in discussion with the previous poet. So this is a part of a much larger poem where I did this with a bunch of other poets and musicians as well. And you can see, like, this is my little introduction. And then I start discussing with a sonnet he created. And this, like a normal text would be, I just write out the text of G. Manley Hopkins, make some changes to enter in the discussion. But it's hard to understand as a reader, what did he do? Unless you know this poem by heart, which is not very likely. So what you can do is, because these are embeddings from another work, you can have a look at, okay, what is the source of this work? So this is the original poem by G. Manley Hopkins.
And can you zoom in a little bit?
I don't think I can, because I didn't implement zoom in functionality.
Control plus.
Really? Okay. No.
Oh, no go. Okay.
It's a Mac, right? Or Shift
No,
plus
it's-
or Apple plus.
Yeah. Okay, perfect. Thanks. Control Shift plus.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Minus go back.
So the poem is actually about creativity. It's G. Manley Hopkins describing basically the creative spirit he sends, fertilizes his soul, and then he struggles a long time to channel it. And then my argument, we won't go into detail in the poem because it's not a poetry presentation, but the argument is basically your big mistake here is that you are a bit arrogant towards the notion of publishing. It's because in the end he says, okay, nobody understands what I did. So I yield you with some size or explanation, the explanation of my soul and what I try to express. So the critique is basically, I want to really show the world what I created. So the publishing part is an inherent part in creation. And then it's more of turning it around, like talking to the soul or the creativity. Like, okay, if the world doesn't understand how important you were to it, please give them, have some patience with them, have some lenience. And I would not have written something like this before I started working on DcentReads, because it's really hard. If you just have this part here, it's okay, maybe it's a nice poem, that most of it actually is from G. Manley Hopkins. And the important part there are the interactions. How do I interact with the original text? And now I'll talk about the technology which allows this, because this is really hard to do with the classical internet. So first, what's the technological stack which I used? So it's peer-to-peer, so the notion of a backend itself is a bit strange, but the tool is called Hypercore, and it's an append-only log. So it stores all the history. And that's already very important, because if I would make a reference to a website as we know it, the owner of the website can stop serving it, so the server stops working, or they can put other content there. Basically, it is very hard to have long-term storage if you rely on someone else serving it. With an append-only log, you link to a particular point in time. So you solve the problem of content changing. Even if the content changes, you link to the history. And the second problem, I will explain when I talk about the network. But first a bit deeper, like just an append-only log, it's not very flexible. So there is another data structure called Hyper-B, which is a distributed key value store. So you have keys and values and you can look them up. And then that's where it becomes complicated. The kind of data structure you need to reference other works, which might also reference other works, it's more of a graph. A graph data structure doesn't yet exist in the Hypercore ecosystem. So I had to play around a bit with how can I model this with a Hyper-B. I'll talk a bit more about this in the next slide. But that's how to model the data. And then how do you distribute the data? The other big problem, there the main tool, the main package is called Hyperswarm. And how this works is when you create something, you have a unique code, a unique identifier, which is the way people can interact with it. And with the URL, this is one hoster has the URL and you are referred to the server which corresponds to it. So then if it goes down, you're doomed. But with Hypercore, with Hyperswarm, many people can say, oh, I have the content of this hash, this long key available. So even if one goes down, the others can still serve it. So for example, if I use a work by G. Manley Hopkins, which he published 120 years ago, it will no longer be available. But had he published it with DcentReads, and had I said, I like this work, I'll use it for my own, I would help keep it available. And then maybe someone later says, oh, I like this guy's work, I'll also use it, so they will help keep my work available. Which is again how creativity works. Like someone writes something, people like it, so they help keep it available in people's minds. So I find it quite a natural fit to think about it in this way. And then a detail, but peer-to-peer it's very hard to use in a browser setting. So to work around this, there is a package called the DHT relay. But that's very technical and it's not the cleanest solution. Basically, it's easier to use as a desktop app than in the browser. And for the front end, I used Vue with Quasar and Electron for the Electron app. but there's nothing special there. The front end is quite minimal. So a little bit more about the data model, because that's maybe for people who work with hypercore an interesting part, because it's often hard because the data structures are very low level. So what I did here was model a graph, and I also had to think a bit about what is a poem, how is a poem structured, because if I reference something else, how does this work? And in poetry it's quite easy. Normally you reference a line number or maybe an entire verse. But then the complication is the thing you reference might be referencing something else again, etc. So the data structure I ended up with was, at the base level there's always text, just a string. Like even if there are 100 references before it, in the end it's a string. So those are the leaf nodes of your graph. And the structure is imposed by, for example, a line or a verse or a poem or a story. So there you can define your own structure, but the rule is that any structure has to reference another structure or content. So structures are your nodes, the non-leaf nodes of the graph. And actually, unless you want to be really experimental, it will be a graph without loops. It will be a tree, because else you have a poem which references itself. And it would be fun. Like, I think you can do fun stuff there, but it's easier to think about as a tree. And in text, there's also often format. So you want to put a bit of text cursive, or you want to right align it. But it's not an inherent part. If I use some lines from someone and he had them cursive right aligned, maybe I don't want this. So it's a separate add-on. So this is, what do you reference, which part of it, where does it start, where does it end, the formatting you want to apply. And this is a concrete example. I'm bad at making proper designs on the computer, so I just wrote it out. But this would be a poem, so that's where you start reading the work. You see, it's a poem, and it has a title structure, which then references some text. So you know this should be shown as a title, so your front-end tab knows, okay, this is a title, I apply the title formatting. Then it has two verses within the data structure itself, which have some lines, and again, the leaf nodes. And then the fun begins. There's also another verse, which is entirely from another poem. So it will look up the unique key of this poem, go into the hyperswarm and say, who has this available? And then render this verse there. So then it will look up, okay, now you reference some lines, and maybe those lines are in that other work, so it doesn't have to look for any other keys. But maybe it references some other work. So you don't even know at this point, when you ask for the outside verse, whether you will have to ask for more outside keys. And then also maybe the second verse still contains another line from another poem. And just as an addendum there, it's not fundamental to the data model, but you can also modify lines. That's crucial if you want to enter in discussion. You render the line, but you also apply a transformation. For example, this word is replaced by this word. So you pull in the original line, the text, and then you apply the transformation you stored locally to make it say something else. Yes?
Are the transforms also stored?
Yeah. So the question was, are the transforms also stored? Yes, so they're a part of the structure. So when you store a reference to a structure, there's also an optional field to store the transformation. And in this way, because actually if you go for an external line from another work, you also need its transformation. Because if the external, this was poorly explained. So if I reference a verse in a poem, which also was referencing other stuff, maybe this verse has references to somewhere else which were transformed. So you need to know the transformations apply to anything you pull in.
And those transformation, how do you express them? Is that JavaScript or is it something like a custom language?
It's really easy because they're simple text transformations. So if you have a string of 100 characters and the first 50 are the same, so you say character 0 to 50, same, like a 0, for example, in the encoding. Then you drop character 51 to 60 and you replace them by 20 other characters. So you say 51 to 60 minus 1, and then 50 to 70, whatever text you want to input there.
Mm-hmm.
Then you can say now put character 61 to 100. So it's an easy problem, luckily, because you know exactly what the source is, thanks to the append-only nature. Because if you look for this kind of problem, the diff match patch library, or libraries which solve this problem, they're quite complex because they assume that the source text might have changed. Like they try to match it as closely as possible, but they don't assume the transformation you want to apply is exact. But it's not super relevant for the talk, but because you have append only and you know exactly what you're referencing, the transformation part is quite easy. Now, this was like the technical part. I didn't go too deep, but I'll be glad to take more questions. But now, more high level. What are the big challenges here? So an obvious one, which I think is not immediately solvable, is if you want to reference a work, it has to be in the model of DcentReads. So for example, the poem by G. Manley Hopkins, I had to input it before I could reference it, which can be a bit annoying. Because if, for example, I really like T.S. Eliot, but he was using DcentReads before it existed. He just references poems all the time. So if I wanted to render, like I use his poetry as well. So I would need to input his poems, but also the poems he references. So it would be quite a lot of work. So that's a disadvantage in terms of usability. Another challenge is if you reference a work in your own work, you want it to stay available. We talked about this already. And it's actually not that easy. If you give me a key and you say this is a DcentReads, and I say, okay, I'll help keep it available for you, I need to figure out which works does it reference. So you traverse the graph, but maybe you change the work later. You say, I make a second version, I append to the hypercore, and it references new works. But this, yeah.
You just actually said that you just traversed the graph, which probably can be a lot of round trips because you have to first ask and then the next one, and you find new ones, and like I don't know, it might take long. Because it just reminded me that there was a discussion like many years ago about like having like a chunk zero of a append only log that you would reference some sort of feed or whatever, where you basically where the author could do this up front and list all the hypercores that he knows are there, and then somebody referencing can just get all of them from there. So it would be a performance optimization and motivate more people to use the DcentReads, because there's technically probably like a lot of ways how it can be done with hypercores to do this kind of things, and this is now one way. But if it's the best way and the most performant way, then maybe everybody would use it.
Yeah, I think the solution I have there is more or less the correct one, but it's again, I think the usability can be improved. So instead of storing block 0, where you need to know exactly what you reference, because you can't change block 0. So if you make a change and you reference something else, it's not included. What you can do if you use Hyper-B is you include an index in the Hyper-B. Just an index of these are the referenced works. And it's the creator's owner to keep the index up to date. So when you first load the hyperpub, how I call the data structure, you look at these are all the works which are referenced, so you can start looking for peers which have them available. And then as you go rendering, you already have the connection open, so it's much quicker. But it's indeed an important problem to solve, because if not, it's very slow to render. So this is the only problem I have more or less solved. That was a really fun technical challenge. So if you have recursive data structures in hypercore, like hypercore rehoster could be the correct tool there. Then there is a UX problem. I need to talk to a designer at some point, because how do you input these references? Okay, it's hard because you click somewhere, you select text, I imagine, then you change it. You need to transform it to the correct format.
I've actually been working on an annoyingly similar project to this, where like I decided that, I mean, the goal is very similar to reference, create a graph of like references. So looking at I was like, how tightly coupled is it to Hyper-B, the data model specifically?
For the rehoster?
No, like,
you mean this structure here, the general?
yes, and like how you turn that structure into a view in the UI.
It's not coupled, so there is a very strict separation where you basically ask for keys in the key value store, and you get the values, and the value can then contain a reference to another key. But it's also decoupled to the point where I don't know if it's reusable, but I can show you. Like, it would be interesting to talk about it and also hear how you solved it.
I didn't solve it.
Okay.
I did have ideas around how to create references, which is like my project's very much like just using HTML and like selecting text creates a link in the post editor, and you fill out the actual like the visible content of the link, and the hyperlink portion points to an anchor that's generated referencing the original content, but like that's probably not very transferable between our two.
I think everything except the last part probably is like just a UI of selecting text, modifying a link.
Yeah.
So
I've run into problems with that already. We could probably talk about that.
Yeah, would be a good idea.
Can you please reframe? What are your end users? Because I didn't. I have some ideas, but I would prefer if you could tell us.
So it's people who want to publish their written text in any way.
Poets, basically.
Or you could also create a newspaper with this.
Yes, but very kind of special poets, because it's poets that use other poets as references.
Oh, so that's the bonus. You could also use it just to publish a text without any references. And it still has the advantage of being peer-to-peer, so it's easy to share with other people, and it will never change.
So if I understood correctly, it's people who want to publish not through the publishers, so they use this as a way of distributing their texts, but they can also reference other...
Even not necessarily. A publisher could use this, and then the writer goes to the publisher, and publisher uses this to publish it. But the intended audience is people who like the idea of connecting directly with the reader, which I'll talk about in the next slide.
You had slides left?
Yeah, but just one with the vision. And
Okay. Because I saw something in one of your previous slides. So, if I'm self-published, why wouldn't that be compatible with copyright law?
Because let me go to the next slide.
Okay, sorry.
So I'll start with the second dot, because that answers the question. Like the current copyright law in the European Union, at least how I understand it, I'm not a lawyer and I need to get in touch with lawyers to figure this out exactly, is if you want to use someone else's work, you need permission of the rights holder, so self-published, that's you. So you need the explicit permission. before you can legally use it. And generally, they also request a fee upfront for the right to use it. So even if you self-publish your stuff, if I want to legally use it, either you need to include some Creative Commons type of license, or I can't use it.
That's no, that's understandable, but that's actually maybe should be a feature in the application. Like it should be easy to check a box, not for maybe give away all rights, but give the right reference.
But that's where the vision on creativity comes.
I know it's kind of it's better to have, you don't want to give away your rights the first thing you do to publish.
Yeah, so I'll just explain the vision and then maybe we can talk about it. So first, for me, creativity is a very much a peer-to-peer process. Someone creates something, someone reads it, listens to it, sees it, and is inspired. And then maybe later when this person creates something, this inspiration flows through. So whatever inspired him or her is then somehow also present in the work they create, which inspires someone else. So you get a chain of inspiring, creating. And to me, everything you put in between this chain hinders creativity. So if you put things behind a paywall or you make something hard to use, you go through publishers which then have complicated legal structures so they can own your rights. Very complex. You need to really think about this stuff if you want to do creative work, and it takes away energy from creativity. So I already explained current copyright law in the EU as I understand it. And then the way I would like to see it is that the inspiration should flow freely for me. So if you are inspired by something, there should be a positive feeling. And if you want to pay it on, like show other people how you were inspired, I think this is good. It's how creativity spreads. So instead of asking formal permission, which is, oh, I need to stop being inspired, ask formal permission. Maybe they deny me the formal permission. Just you can use anything you want. You need to reference it in a way that's very clear, like this inspired me. And then if you end up making money, the money, a part of it should flow back to the work which inspired you or the works which inspired you. So you solve the problem of taking something from someone else and not giving any money, which is the problem copyright set out to solve. But you don't get the disadvantage of blocking creativity. So that's a bit the legal challenge. DcentReads works in the model below, because if not, maybe it would work, but it would be very complex. So that would be my vision on creativity, rather than all the complicated licenses to give away your rights. Have another model of rights.
So my input here is that I really like this. This is focusing creativity, and the point is, I think, is that once this starts flowing, the inspiration creativity chain that you just described, what will most likely happen is that probably we'll have to adjust the copyright laws.
Yeah,
they are a little bit outdated, and they're not the first ones to. So full speed ahead.
It's part of the plan. But it's challenging.
Okay. Yes, very challenging. Thanks. Yeah, it's mind blowing even because, anyway, you speeding the flow so much that if people start using it in as they should, it would create an overflow of creativity, and how do you deal with the overflow of creativity? If you are I don't know if it's only my mind, but my mind, this kind of overflow of creativity can destroy creativity itself somehow, because it's so. Because I don't know, because I'm making some assumptions that might be wrong, but made by people don't have to think so much because they just follow the flow, and it's more easy to follow the flow than to create the original work. And when you have those two things, maybe a majority of the people want to follow the flow and not create the new stuff.
So I think you make some interesting points, but it would be fun to discuss them afterwards because they're more philosophical than technical, if that's okay with you. But yeah, I'd be glad to talk about creativity.
Yeah, I agree. I was also just, I mean, I will a little bit, it's not a question of, but it was a little bit of a association that I got when Miguel asked this, that in a way art is a form of conversation between artist and the audience. So technically, other authors also can, like you obviously want to also discuss not just with the audience but also with other authors. So if this turns into just flow of answering and discussing authors to authors, it's technically also not bad, because maybe then we will all become authors and we will actually start a real peer-to-peer discussions. So I just was thinking that maybe this is not necessarily a bad thing. But
It really depends on the metaphysical view on what creativity is.
Yes.
So that's why it's a very interesting question.
Yes. Nora, I think, had a question.
I have another question. I think there are similar platforms for like Instagram or YouTube. They have this mix with someone else's creation. So why people want to use this platform? But instead, like, what's
I have a good answer, I think, because some you can keep. So a good example on YouTube, which became popular, I think, during COVID, is the reaction videos. A new music video is released, and then someone reacts to it, to give their impression of listening to it for the first time. And they got into a lot of trouble because of copyright law. So the current process is you need to ask permission to the publisher to be allowed to react to the videos they publish. If not, they will be taken down. And also, if they make income from the videos they produce, it's their income. It doesn't go to the artists. So if you would have a decent feeds for videos, you could have a music video from the artist. You reference it in your own video, your reaction video. So it's clear what you're referencing, and even better, if you make money from it, X% flows immediately back to it. So you actually solve the problem they try to solve by taking it down or forcing people to apply for permission. You just give part of the money to them automatically because it's the way creativity works. So it was actually a really good question, and I'm glad you asked it.
I have a small question. You mentioned music before.
Yeah.
You're aware of the site called Who Sampled?
I think so. It's like the linking back to who sampled who.
Yeah, it's like this with I think it's mainly like hip hop and artists. Like the whole point there is that it's a sampling culture.
Yeah.
You kind of similar to I did not know actually that poetry had this kind of culture.
Yeah,
But this is
before it
news
was
to me.
cool.
I know I'm into it now. I'm into it now. I get it. So there they actually, it's like a Wikipedia site where they actually try to keep track and identify each and every sample in a song. They could have technically used decent, well.
Yeah, it would be like I love music as well, and I'd really like to create decent beats. And I've got
support.
I've got the debate. I've got it working to the extent that you can upload a FLAC file and spread it in a distributed way. But it becomes really powerful when you can not just sample second 5 to second 8 of a song, but if you would upload all the stems, the recording tracks, and because that's the best kind of sample, you just take the drum and the bass, which is what you want, make a beat with it, and add your own rep. So okay, you have the clear references to where you took it from. It's with a lot of respect. So if you earn money from the song, you pay back to who you sampled it from.
Unless they're dead.
Then again, law has to decide there, where does the money go? Does it go nowhere? Does it go to the people who inherit, or does it go to a fund to help new artists, whatever? But just that's a problem for the law. Once they would adopt more this flow back of money system, if ever.
Can you please put the slide before the challenges? There was what reminds me in the beginning was the French surrealists that they did the cadavre exquisite, the exquisite corpse on poetry. They just wrote the first. I don't know if you're familiar with.
If you can sketch it.
It's like you write a line of a poet. It's like a group of poets. They do it on group, and you write a line of you write 2 lines of a poem. So and you hide one, and the other person just sees one and writes 2 lines, hides one, and the other person. And you always, I think it could be a challenge to help to make collective works, to have some kind of feature where people could build together poems.
Yeah, you definitely you could technically, because of it's another part of the stack I'm using, Autobase, which allows you to mix hypercores of different people, and you could. Even as it is now, model this where people work together on a work, and it's also clear who worked on it. So again, there is an explicit reference to everyone who contributed what. So again, if you want to have a money flow, you would know who to distribute to.
Yes, and it's some kind of quotation of the surrealists that did these kind of games, and people don't. I still did it when I was younger with other friends, but I think it lost a bit. Maybe sometimes nobody remembers of it.
You can always reintroduce it with the new technology. Yeah.
One more question. What about, can you imagine where this type of technique of referencing can be used, or where you research this? Probably where are we already using it? I can imagine scientific texts, literature. This what Nora mentioned, so a pop thing.
Music, and also in news articles. So people quote other people. They reference official news statements. I think it would be beneficial for our consumption of news if you could see, okay, you quote this guy, what's the context?
Translations.
You can give the microphone.
No, translation.
But I was just thinking code also, where, NPM, this is literally also referencing other code. So there is a lot of things that we have in society that are built on this principle, actually.
Yeah, I think NPM would not immediately be the fit, because there you reference a repository and then you go from there. So the structure is easier to handle than if you have deep links. But who knows? I haven't thought that far.
Or even supply chains, when you make a new product, you have some parts of it that where are they sourced from, and I mean, I don't know how they could use the app, but it's kind of interesting how many things are built on this principle.
Yeah. But then for text, I think it can be, it's not that complex, because I wrote this as a hobby project and it's kind of working, but it's quite powerful to me to always have context, an explicit source which never goes away. So I think making it peer-to-peer actually adds value in a very natural way.
I just thought you could maybe use it for patching existing repositories and use those. But if this was used instead of for poetry, for code first, then I don't know, depends on if you're more inspired by the poetry or by this way of doing things, then there could be a library that is really optimized for every possible use case, like all the ones that were mentioned. And somebody could, of course, also do the poetry, but then you could use this already to finance this library, because it would be just a library, I guess. So not an end user thing, but maybe if it's integrated, if it's using itself, then people could start doing
agree.
stuff. And
So now I'm,
Completely agree. Let's fork it then.
you're free to fork it. It's all open source. But so now I'm working on the music aspect, and this will be for me the moment to look what's common, and what can I share, because, for example, once we go here, this is specific to text, but I think also when you make references, in the end there will be a graph structure or a tree structure. So then the question becomes, can we have a general graph within hypercore? I'm sure we can, and this will probably be more the basis of something to create around this. But because it's all new and hypercore isn't yet made for graphs, I think it's too challenging a problem for me to solve generally. But if some genius wants to tackle it, I'd be happy to use someone else's graph library.
I think it just needs a lot of time and funding.
Hello, sorry. I have a strong imagination, and sometimes it goes crazy. I know, but I'm going to try just to give another idea to use this use case. It would be also on writing, and it would be a place where you choose a word. It would be made decentralized. You choose a word, and anybody can give a meaning, explain that word, and you can start explain the word inside the sentence that explains that word, and each person that does that, it earns a token, and of course, it has to be a blockchain project. It earns a token, and then you keep doing that until you have the entire dictionary library, and then you teach a machine how to think from there, and then the machine thinks, and each person that has tokens of the words that they put there, they receive them. Because this machine, teaching a machine to read in such a way, it would be very rich. Because, for instance, for a sentence, you could have all the contexts where the same word and the same sentence appears. Okay, just did.
Yeah. So the beauty of DcentReads is that you could model the text part with DcentReads already, with how it is, and then build the token logic and the machine learning around it. So it's like a modular project which is combining different parts. So
I'm just saying this because sorry, this is we can speak after because this is very rich to imagine things and to speak. I'm just saying this because they are making it, in my opinion. I'm not sure if they're making it right, because in some years we will have to start to write our own way to teach some kind of machine to speak or to think, or because for me, in my opinion, it's not enough the content that we have on the internet, because it will never explain it so well if you started from scratch. But that's why I gave you this opinion, because I thought about it, and it's just an opinion anyway.
We can talk about it as well during our metaphysics discussion of creativity. It's fun topics.
So my question, what's next? So you said the audio part, but what about in general regarding sustainability of the project and integrating maybe these payments and stuff like that? What is on the roadmap here? So
the roadmap is, I'm now finalizing, I've got a data model at last, and I'm implementing it now. So this will be the beta release. And this is the most important milestone. And then I will start using it to publish those crazy things I've been working on, up to the point where I use music, because it's also fun in poetry, and this is also not new, to reference music. But then again, because we live in this age, people don't have to have the melody in their head when they read a piece of music. You can render it next to it, play it, and they immediately have the emotions, the vibe of the music while they're reading, which is what is in the head of the creator at the time. So that will be when I... Actually, this is already possible with the current version of Decent Beats. So I'll release this one at some point as well. And so that's on the roadmap there. And then it would be fun to think about other use cases where maybe other people can get involved. But before I do this, in parallel with what I'm doing now, it will be finding some legal advice. Because if I would publish my creations now, I think they would be illegal. So I first need to figure out if this is true, if my view on current copyright law is correct, or if it's too negative. And then basically go from there, be a bit more informed about the landscape.
Do you know Internet Archive? They always publish like some literature, movies and stuff like that that is open domain.
Yeah.
So you could kind of play with open domain stuff.
Yeah, but then again, it's a block on creativity because,
Yes.
oh, I'm inspired by a song which is not an open domain. What do I do?
Isn't it pure? I mean, I'm not super familiar with fair use laws in Europe, but
They don't exist. Well,
okay.
there are exceptions, but not in the fair use terms of US.
Right. I mean, like, I was going to say that, like, isn't fair use means that if it's transformative and it doesn't harm the market of the original content, then it's fair use and you can use your transformative content. In this case, I would even argue that, like, your transformative content increases or, like, boosts the visibility of the original content.
So I would agree completely, but I also think this would be challenged because I don't just have the references to make it work where you can have the context. You need to input the original work also in the data structure. So then this work exists. If someone looks up this work, they will get it. And then that's where it becomes problematic. And the same with music. It would imply having music available there. So I think it fits the spirit of fair use, but because of the technology, it becomes complicated.
Did you visit any meetups or groups, literature groups, and introduce this to them? Like, is there also a plan to do this, to actually onboard this particular subgroup or group of users?
Yeah, I haven't done this yet, but that would definitely be fun. I think people might like this.
Yeah,
So
I
when-
think so too, especially if they're doing exactly this.
But this would be after the beta when it's a bit more usable, because now like to create the embeddings, I don't have a UI, so I had to manually input the transformations. So there's some work to do there before I can tell people, look, I have this cool app. But that's definitely the plan, because that's the dream, no? That people use it and be creative with it.
So you think the UI, UX is also like something that has to be improved?
For sure, because most users won't be technical users. So it has to be a smooth experience where they just focus on publishing.
So currently, like if I click create and want to actually do it...
So you could create something very easily if you don't do embeddings. So you can write a poem. What would be your poem?
I have a horse.
I have a horse, but it rains outside. Hans is leaving tomorrow, and I have to drive.
You have to drive.
And you can add also this, you have to drive, question mark.
Yeah, that's embedding, sorry. That's a co-creation
So
then.
this is are you happy with the way it looks?
Yes.
Maybe we can give another name.
Just my name with the I
Oh.
could be small also.
Sorry.
I mean, it's more like artistic, but yeah.
Yeah. Maybe the name of the poem. We can call it I Have a Horse.
Yeah, really, our projects are annoyingly similar.
The crazy thing, what I like here is like I have to drive, but I have a horse. So what the heck is this?
Yeah, that's interesting.
So now
Somebody will remix and ask the question.
we can do the sanity check. Are you sure you want to share this with the world?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
then we will share it with the world. So you go to the library, we host it, and now if someone inputs this on their, either on the browser, let's see, because the browser is slow and the Wi-Fi here is quite bad, but we will see, it should be available.
So people go to the library and they can find hashes.
No, this is where you store, oh look, it worked, so and quite fast even. So if anyone who inputs this now would keep it, would see your work. The library is where you store the poems you created or the ones you visited. And you can help host them.
Can I discover all the things that other people wrote currently?
So that's a tricky one.
Because of this
I
long
could,
stuff.
like, in the next iteration, a library will be a Hyper-B. And then you can share it with other people. So there's definitely some social things you can do there. Another thing I didn't mention, but which is related, is I like the idea of collecting things. A poetry collection, but not just your work, but work of a bunch of people. And then you share this with other people.
It's hard to discover other people's work because there's no blockchain. There is nowhere where they publish. It's just like you alone publish.
It's very, this is the identifier. You can just put it behind a URL, put it on a blockchain. So it's quite flexible. This is just a way of
But DcentReads doesn't store the list of all because it's all peer-to-peer. So you don't know about the poem. That if I would publish it from my computer, you wouldn't know about it.
But for me, that's the feature.
Yeah. No, I'm just wondering now for like somebody who is not very familiar with peer-to-peer. Even I now forgot, and I was like, okay, so where can I see the list of everything? Oh, it's not.
It would be if this is indeed a usability. Oh, sorry.
No. I just commented out loud. On,
What did you say?
I would.
I say that there is no list of anything. Like there is no. I mean, but it's a curation question more or less. So like having some kind of summary of it all.
Yeah.
Sure, anybody can actually do that.
And even I could, like, if this is indeed a usability problem, if I see this is annoying for people, it would be straightforward to add either an opt-out or an opt-in, publish to public list, which just whenever you publish something, it immediately goes there.
But it will be pretty centralized.
Not necessarily with Autobase. So you could have a shared list between different people. So this is possible with peer-to-peer. It's more on the cutting edge side of it.
Somebody would be an author of the Autobase.
Everyone would be an author.
But you would have to define it in advance. Who are it
Like
wouldn't be open.
The way it would work, if I were to implement this now, thinking out loud, is the app includes an invitation to this Autobase. So everyone is by default invited.
Yeah,
And-
that's true. But like the Autobase, the invitation of the Autobase would probably run on your backend or something. So
It runs on everyone's computer. There is no server necessary for an
but doesn't the
Autobase.
Autobase create an output hypercore? So there's a key pair for that.
Yeah, if everyone has a shared view on the Autobase. So basically all the hypercores linked to the Autobase are synced between the peers. And then everyone calculates the correct view, the shared view on the same
okay.
Autobase.
Oh, interesting. All right.
It's a really powerful structure.
So, you're going to be famous, and you have 10,000 poets there. I'm not sure if there is 10,000 poets on Earth, but anyway, maybe just 5 or 6, I don't know. How do you put them on the first page? How do you curate the first page?
I wouldn't. Who would?
So this is what I said, like peer-to-peer. Miguel is not from peer-to-peer world, so it's not probably understandable concept. How does this work? That this is not like it's basically just a UI, for everyone looking the same, and you like can't now create a poem. Like if I would create it on my computer, nobody else of you would see this unless I share this particular link with you. So there is no database, there's nothing. It's everybody's creating on their computer using this AI, basically.
Yeah, the peer-to-peer way would be
What did I say?
other
UI,
people
sorry.
curate lists of the good poems, and you follow